Okay, so have you looked at the state of our public conversations lately? I mean, really looked at it. We are living in an era of massive echo chambers, deeply fragmented public spheres, and just incredibly emotionally charged political debates. It often feels like we're completely losing our ability to talk to one another. Actually, scratch that. It feels like we're just shouting past each other, let alone agreeing on any complex moral or political issues. So the big question we really have to ask ourselves right now is this: is true democratic agreement even still possible today? Can we still find common ground?
To answer that, we have to look at the work of one of the absolute giants of modern philosophy, Jürgen Habermas. Throughout his incredible career, his core motivation has essentially been one massive, wildly ambitious project. His goal? To save modernity. And what he means by that is literally rescuing the idea of reason. He wants to prove to us that reason isn't just some dusty, outdated concept you read about in textbooks, but rather it's the absolute precondition for a free, just society and a functioning democracy. He absolutely refuses to let our democratic society just succumb to all this fragmentation.
So, let's dive right into this. Welcome to this explainer on Discourse Ethics. Today we're going to unpack exactly how we can make complex, morally sound decisions together as a society. And we'll do this using the structured framework developed by Habermas and his contemporary, Carl Otto Appel. If you're a focused learner looking for the direct paths to understanding how democratic conversation actually works under the hood, you are in the exact right place to finally make sense of the whole shebang.
Here's our agenda for today. We'll start with reason in a fragmented world, then map the shift from Kant to Habermas, cover the rules of the ideal discourse, see what happens when theory meets reality, and finally look at the foundation of our democracy. Let's get right into it. Section 1. Reason in a fragmented world. Now, when we look at political discourse today, it's messy, right? It's chaotic, it relies heavily on strategic maneuvering, and it's driven so much by raw emotion. It is incredibly easy to just be cynical about the whole thing. But Habermas argues there's actually a hidden rationality built directly into human communication, one that we use every single day without even realizing it. Think about the assumption of truth for a second. When you walk down the street and ask a random person for the time, or when you're just listening to a friend tell a story, you don't walk around assuming everyone is lying to you by default. You just don't. If we did, human cooperation and society itself would literally collapse overnight. We inherently assume the other person is telling the truth. Habermas calls this communicative rationality. Our language, at its core, is primarily oriented toward mutual understanding. So when people use language just to manipulate, which Habermas calls systematically distorted communication, it's actually a total deviation from this fundamental everyday norm.
Section 2. From Kant to Habermas.
To really get discourse ethics, we need to know what it was reacting against and how Habermas updated traditional ethics to actually fit our modern, highly pluralistic society. Immanuel Kant, the absolute heavyweight of Enlightenment philosophy, separated practical reason into three distinct dimensions. First, you've got the technical. How do I achieve a specific goal as efficiently as possible? Then, the pragmatic. What's actually good for me and my life? And finally, the big one, the moral dimension. What must I absolutely do or not do? Kant's ultimate stress test for morality was the categorical imperative, which basically said you should act only according to a rule that you would want to become a universal law for everyone. But here's where Habermas makes his absolute game-changing leap. Kant's approach was, well, fundamentally monological. It was entirely solitary. It essentially asked the individual to sit alone in their room and run their actions through this mental universal law filter. Habermas, along with Appel, realized that this just doesn't cut it in a modern society packed with totally diverse viewpoints. Instead, Habermas takes that moral filter and moves it directly into the public square. It's a real paradigm shift. It is no longer what can I will as universal law. It completely shifts to a dialogical approach. What can we agree upon together through rational conversation?
Section 3. Rules of the ideal discourse.
So, if we're going to figure out our morals by actually talking to each other, it obviously can't just be a free-for-all shouting match. We need ground rules to validate the conversation. According to the source material, every single time we make a rational statement in a debate, we are inherently making three claims, whether we consciously know it or not. First, truth. We're claiming that the facts we're stating are actually accurate. Second, truthfulness or authenticity. We're claiming we are being sincere and not just trying to deceive our listeners. And third, rightness. We claim that our statement is morally legitimate and contextually appropriate. For any discourse to be valid, the participants absolutely have to be willing to defend these three claims with good, solid reasons.
And that perfectly sets up Habermas's crucial discourse principle. It states that only those norms can claim validity that could meet with the consent of all affected in their role as participants in a practical discourse. Now, what does this actually mean in plain English? It means you cannot make rules for people without those people. It's fundamentally all about participation. If a new rule affects someone, they must have the right to pull up a chair and participate in the conversation about that rule. Building right on top of that is the universalization principle. Now, this is the ultimate stress test for any democratic decision. It states that for any norm to be valid, all affected people must be able to willingly accept the consequences and side effects that arise from universally following that norm. No coercion, no force whatsoever. Everyone looks at the fallout of a decision and freely says, yes, I can live with those consequences.
Section 4. Theory meets reality.
Okay, I know what you might be thinking. Uncoerced agreement from literally everyone affected? No way. That sounds like a total utopian fantasy. And guess what? Habermas totally knows these are highly idealized rules. When we compare this pristine ideal to the messy real world, we see some major differences. In an ideal discourse, you'd have unrestricted access for everyone, unlimited time to debate until the end of days, and complete perfect knowledge. But in a real discourse, like an actual parliamentary debate or working ethics commission, you have heavily restricted access, super tight deadlines, and highly uncertain knowledge. We're constantly forced to make trade-offs. We can't invite 1 million citizens into a room to debate a single tax law for 10 years, so we form representative expert commissions or citizen forums. Yes, the ideal gets compromised by reality, but that ideal still serves as the absolute measuring stick for how we ought to structure those real-world institutions.
Let's look at how this applies practically today. Take a massively complex, sprawling puzzle like the bioeconomy, which touches on biotechnology, agriculture, and climate change. The sources show us exactly how structured practical discourses are utilized in a case like this. First, you have to assess incredibly long-term, highly uncertain consequences. Next, you have to integrate deeply interdisciplinary themes, meaning scientists, economists, and ethicists all actually have to talk to each other and understand each other. Finally, you have to navigate shifting cultural values. Because an issue like this affects literally everyone, you can't just let a handful of experts decide our fate behind closed doors. You need a structured discourse that gets as close to Habermas's ideal as practically possible to ensure those decisions are, actually legitimate.
Section 5. The foundation of our democracy. So why does understanding this dense philosophical framework actually matter for the survival of our modern political systems? The answer comes down to 2 words: procedural legitimacy. Look, in our modern pluralistic society, we just do not have a single absolute moral authority anymore. We don't all share the exact same religion, the same background, or even the same personal values. And because we lack that shared substantive baseline, the procedure is literally everything. The fair, rational, and inclusive procedure of the discourse is the only thing that legitimizes the laws we all have to wake up and live under every day. The process legitimizes the outcome. Without that fair procedure, we really can't claim to have a functioning democracy at all.
And this brings us to the ultimate takeaway. Yes, perfectly fulfilling the discourse principle and the universalization principle is practically impossible in the grind of everyday politics. But striving for that ideal, that is the absolute bedrock of democracy. Committing to this framework combats that heavy political fatigue and cynicism we all feel sometimes. It re-enables what Habermas famously calls the public use of reason, meaning we finally get away from cheap emotional manipulation and get back to validating claims with actual solid arguments. That striving, that constant effort, is the only way to legitimately justify the democratic decisions that govern our entire lives.
So, I want to leave you with a bit of a provocative thought as we wrap this up. The next time you find yourself in a heated argument, or maybe you're just evaluating some wild political claim online, take a second and think about the assumptions you are making. Are you demanding truthfulness? Are you actually considering the consent of everyone affected by the issue? The tools for saving modern conversation are literally right there, built into the very structure of the language we use every single day. The real question is, how will you apply the public use of reason in your very next debate? Thanks for joining this explainer, and keep seeking the clarity beneath the complexity.